Welcome to Coffee and Popcorn, where we bring you the most striking stories from around the world. Today's story is quite a long one and involves a woman who sets out to get revenge on everyone who played a role in her husband cheating on her. There are a lot of twists and turns in this story, so you'll want to get yourself a coffee and grab a bowl of popcorn so we can get into it.
I met my ex in 2012, right after he turned 20 and I just turned 30. I'd only dated and been with women exclusively until I came out as bisexual at 28. Let's just say the year I turned 29 was a busy year, making up for what I missed out on. It was mostly casual hookups, and I tried dating 2 different guys for a few weeks, but it never worked out. I kind of figured that I'd probably end up marrying a woman or not getting married at all because I just didn't see myself catching romantic or sexual feelings for a guy. Then I met Ryan. This was the only other time in my life I'd fallen in love, had butterflies, and found myself constantly thinking about a guy and wanting to spend every moment with him. He fell for me too, and we became an item. He did say that he considered my bisexuality a turn-on because he also had a thing for straight guys. It also gave him pause because of my desires for the opposite sex, and his concern that it might lead me astray. I thought about it and understood it to be a legitimate worry, but I assured him that I couldn't even think about anyone else because I was really into him. I knew he was the one by the end of the first month. I was in love, but I wasn't going to say this too soon because I didn't want to risk scaring him off. On our first date, he admitted to me that he was legally blind due to a genetic disorder, and that it was progressive. Eventually, he'd only have a sliver of his peripheral vision. He immediately said that he understood if I didn't want to see him again, because no other guy had wanted to date him and be his driver all the time. I grew up with a brother in a wheelchair, who never learned how to walk or talk due to misdiagnosed meningitis at 6 months old. I told him that, and said what my brother had was a severe disability, so from my perspective, his blindness had no effect on my feelings, and that I'd always be his driver. This was a small sacrifice to be with him. The following years were bliss. We brought out the best in each other. My family, who was surprised but very supportive when I came out, adored Ryan and treated him like family. They even said that I seemed happier since we'd been together. When I met him, he was working part-time in retail and had done very poorly in high school because he lost a lot of his confidence as his vision deteriorated. I told him that one thing I did insist on was that he do something with his life because he had too much to offer. I also let him know that I'd help him however I could. He said he wanted to be a teacher, but didn't think someone with limited vision could teach, which is nonsense. I put him through community college for 2 years, then 2.5 years of a local university, and finally, the 1-year teacher certification program as required by California. I drove countless miles and paid hundreds in public transportation costs for him, never blinking an eye or complaining. We'd been together for 7.5 years now, and were engaged to be married in October, which would be around the last semester of his teaching certification, which involved him teaching students at his former high school with his favorite teacher from his own school days. That's when the pandemic hit and schools closed. Fortunately, he had enough hours in the classroom so he still qualified to be certified after the governor issued a waiver via executive order. On the 3rd day of the stay-at-home order in March, my life crumbled when I innocently found out he cheated on me with an ex. We'll call him Lucas. I found out because he handed his phone to me to show me something on Instagram, and I accidentally fat-thumbed the back arrow, which took me back to a list of all his messages. I looked and recognized the name of his ex. It was the second message in the list, and was dated a week ago. I clicked on it, and my heart sank. There were directions to my house, pictures, dirty talk, and Ryan reassuring Lucas not to worry about me because he had my location on just in case I came home from work. I immediately started screaming, demanding to know everything, and he admitted to having his ex over twice for sex, and that they didn't use protection. Lucas was engaged to another woman during this time, adding yet another victim. Ryan also admitted to sleeping with his straight but curious cousin by marriage. He slept with him twice, and again, with no protection. Finally, he admitted to sleeping with a supposed straight guy, who he and many of my cousins went to school with. I remember this guy because I told Ryan that I really didn't like him or want them talking because I didn't trust him after what I'd read about him. Since they were never close friends, I didn't feel like this was a big sacrifice, or that I was being too controlling, and I assumed that he knew why me and all my cousins felt that way. The reason was, after high school at the age of 20, this guy was convicted of sexual assault, which involved a minor. He went to prison and had to register as a sex offender for life. All of this happened in my home while I was at work. We spent the whole weekend crying, with me asking Ryan over and over again about why he'd do this. Monday comes around, and my anger became sadness. I made a comment saying that I was going to pull all the phone records going back 3 years. Only when he heard that did he admit to one more guy. Some random guy named Frankie he met on Grindr. This was the first person he cheated on me with, and they continued to casually hook up for nearly 2 years, with the last time being in February, which was just a month ago. Ryan's affair started with Frankie the day after graduating with his bachelor's in May 2018. He was drunk from celebrating and wanted to have sex. I too had been celebrating with him and said I was too drunk to perform and said I'd make it up the next day. After that, I fell asleep on the couch. Apparently, he was angry horny because he downloaded Grindr, chatted with this Frankie guy, and arranged to have sex in his car, which was in a church parking lot across the street from our condo, which happens to be across the street from a school, which is an important fact for later. All the times they hooked up after that was in my condo, while I was working or visiting a friend for the night up the coast. Ryan used to love coming with me, but occasionally started saying that he couldn't because of homework and studying. I absolutely lost it, told him to get in the car, and I drove him to his family's house so he could tell them what he did, so they'd understand why he was moving back into their house. While he was in the house, I was in the driveway on the phone with AT&T, ordering the 3 years' worth of detailed calls and text logs. I then made an appointment to be screened for STIs. I suspended his service until he could figure out how to pay for his own phone, then deleted the social media accounts he cheated with. To make sure he couldn't hide more evidence, I temporarily changed all his passwords so only I had access to his cloud. I also called the bank and issued a stop payment on his final tuition check that I sent to the certification program the week before. It hadn't hit the bank yet. Before deleting his social media, except Facebook, I took screenshots of the entire Instagram conversation with his ex, Lucas, and mailed the conversation to his fiancée. She deserved to know so she could see a doctor and get tested too. Lucas's family is very religious, and during his high school days, they kicked him out for 3 days when he tried to come out as bi. They only took him back when he took it back. Needless to say, his fiancée ended it and he got kicked out. That's one down. Eventually, Ryan came back to the car and we went home. I took his house key and told him to say goodbye to our 3 pets and get packing. The entire time he packed, I studied the phone records to find out dates, times, and if there was anyone else he was leaving out. He answered every question I asked, and it was then that I discovered that the sex offender who he had oral sex with in my home, but fully slept with him in the same parking lot, might actually have been caught on camera. The wheels started turning, and the next day I went over to the church, and sure enough, spotted a camera. I spoke to a secretary at the church and informed them about a registered sex offender having sex in their parking lot, and that not only was it a violation of his parole for indecent exposure, but he was not allowed to be that close to a school. I was in luck. They had a digital 2-year loop system that started deleting day by day after it had been retained for 2 years plus 1 day. It was April 2020, and Ryan first cheated with Frankie in May 2018, and with the sex offender in April 2019. I told them I was filing a police report and that probation would require a copy of it. They said they would save the file and allow me to save them to a thumb drive so I could submit them with my police report. Within a month, the sex offender was locked up again. That's 2 down. I also filed a police report against Frankie. The police said it was a relatively minor infraction, but since it was across from a school playground and skate park, they would follow up, but there'd be no jail time. I researched the hell out of Frankie and called him to confront him. He was smug and admitted to knowing about me the whole time. What he didn't know is that I found out he had a job that required security clearance, and he had several judgments against him, and collection agencies were looking for him. I didn't know why they couldn't find him and just garnish his wages, but it turns out that he's Hispanic, has 2 last names, was a junior, and frequently went by his middle name Francisco, or Frankie for short. Because of this, he simply got lost in paperwork confusion. I sent a letter to the collection agencies and let his employer know his current location and contact info. I also sent a copy of the police report regarding the misdemeanor indecent exposure, for which he pled guilty. His wages did get garnished, but only for 2 paychecks, because the misdemeanor was enough for him to lose his security clearance and get fired. 3 down. Next, I contacted Ryan's family on his mother's side, pretending to be him by using his Facebook account. I made sure they knew that he slept with his cousin, and it spread through the family like wildfire. Soon enough, his cousin contacted me because he couldn't get a hold of Ryan. He wanted to know why he'd expose what they did. I just laughed and said you shouldn't screw your cousins, especially when they're engaged, and that he messed around in my house, so now it was my turn for payback. 4 down. Lastly, I'd already stopped the payment for Ryan's certificate, but since he was so close to finishing, I was sure his family would bail him out and pay the university. Like I said, indecent exposure is usually a slap on the wrist type of misdemeanor. However, I remembered that some of the paperwork he signed said you could lose your teaching certification for documented acts of moral turpitude. I sent a copy of both police reports from the parking lot, with still shots from the security footage, clearly showing Ryan's face to the school district he'd been teaching in. That's the 5th and final down. Admittedly, I did all this out of anger, but he shattered my sense of self-worth and made me incredibly bitter and untrusting after years of being generous and supporting him. Everywhere I looked in town, I thought of Ryan and the cheating. I felt a terrible energy in my condo, knowing that it all happened there. I stayed for 9 months and watched all 5 of their lives self-destruct. After that, I sold my condo and relocated to the Pacific Northwest to start over. The only sad thing about this is Ryan's ex, Lucas, committed suicide several months after I moved. It's too bad that his family was so closed-minded that they turned on their own son, but in the end, it's not my fault that he cheated on his fiancée by coming into my home at my fiancée's invitation to cheat. Suicide is never the answer to someone's problem, and I hope the fiancé that Lucas cheated on doesn't blame herself. It's his family who should feel responsible.
That is one heck of a revenge story. OP really wanted to make sure that everyone paid the price for the pain she felt. That said, it really is unfortunate that someone ended up losing their life because of it. While cheating is wrong, that's too steep a price to pay. If I'm going to be honest, OP did play a role in someone losing their life, even if she feels justified in her actions because of the role they played in her hurt. Exposing him in such a way, knowing how his family felt about his sexuality, is not a route I would have gone down because I've heard too many horror stories regarding that sort of thing. At the end of the day, you don't know what kind of danger you're exposing that person to. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Coffee and Popcorn, and I can't wait to see you on the next one.